Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. When politicians gathered in Washington last weekend for the annual Mardi Gras ball, they had king-making of a different sort in mind as the state moves into a major election year. We'll look tonight at what was whispered in Washington and at the impact that term limits might have on legislative positions. We'll also look at the latest on the Tom Benson situation and the impact that irrevocable trusts might have on the outcome. Our Future Watch segment reports on a legislator's idea to create a new parish from the West Bank, and we'll examine a proposed water park and theater site for the lakefront. Making a splash for us are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol, Laborde, producer of Informed Sources; Jeremy Alford, publisher, LaPolitics.com; Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter; and Jaquetta White, reporter, The New Orleans Advocate. And we're going to go to Jaquetta first. Jaquetta, you had a piece in the paper today, and this is about the continuing Benson family saga. But you focused on a key issue in this whole situation, which is the trust.
That's right.
The irrevocable trust. If you could just sort of explain to us how is this involved?
Sure. So the more explosive details of this revolve obviously around Tom Benson's heirs, his daughter, Renee Benson, and his grandchildren, Rita and Ryan LeBlanc, saying that he is mentally unfit to run the team, Tom Benson's desire to give the team upon his passing to his wife, Gail, and then his claim that his heirs are unfit to run the business. A side drama sort of playing out to this is how he would go about actually giving the teams to Gail. 95% of the Pelicans and about 60% of the Saints are held in what's known as irrevocable trusts. There are about 7 of these that are split up between the 3 heirs who were supposed to take over. An irrevocable trust, once it's created, and these are created so that the heirs don't have to pay estate taxes. So it's kind of a legal tax shelter, I guess. Yeah. And so what happens is when these are created, you can't change the names on the trust. He can't say, I don't want it to go to these folks anymore, I want it to go to someone else. But what he can do, because it's a grantor trust, is a swap out of assets. So he can say, I'll take out what's in there and put something else in of equal value. And he made a first attempt to do this and offered $427 million in unsecured notes, which means they weren't backed by anything, and some other assets, and that was rejected.
It was rejected by whom? Can you explain that role too?
Sure. There's a trustee named by Tom Benson. His name's Bobby Rosenthal. He's with a law firm in San Antonio, and this is Tom Benson's longtime law firm, the same firm that his primary attorney, Stanley Rosenberg, practices at. He's a partner in this firm.
And so why did he reject this first promissory note?
Sure. So even though he was appointed by Tom Benson, his duty is to protect the fiduciary interests of the people named on the trusts. And he said he didn't think the offer was prudent, primarily because it included an unsecured note, which is not backed by anything. And so he turned it down.
And also the amount was questioned. The first note amounted to $427 million,
right,
but the trustee said that undervalued the assets. And could you explain what the assets are that are included in the trust?
Sure. So in the family said that it undervalued the teams because they're going by estimates that are out there that if they were sold, they would together be sold for more than $1 billion, more than $1.5 billion. The tricky thing here is that the entirety of the teams are not held in these trusts. Tom Benson still controls 100% of voting power in the trusts, and only shares of the teams are held in the trusts. And until evaluation is done, we don't know exactly how much those shares would cost. And that's what's going on right now, evaluation of the assets that are offered as well as the teams. So Tom Benson came back last week, actually Saturday, with a second offer. And this one is $449 million,
Million, right.
That's right. And a share of a ranch that the family owns in Texas, Benson Farm and Ranch. And the $449 million is backed this time by the teams as collateral. As collateral.
So then what does that mean? If by chance Mr. Benson can't meet the terms of the note, what happens then with the teams as collateral?
The heirs who are now not getting the teams could move to seize them.
Then that's not saying that would be the case. I'm just sort of looking at possibilities.
Right.
So right now, the trusts remain as they have been. Nothing has been changed. This is all maneuvering to make some changes, correct?
As I understand it. However, Tom Benson's lawyer, Paul Cordes, has said that the deal is done, that they only need the trustee to agree to the valuation, and if they don't agree to it, they'll take it to a judge. However, the trustee says that he has final say in this, and so there may be a little bit of a skirmish there, but the trustee has not responded to the new offer.
And ultimately, this is going to all be evaluated by the NFL, and a whole bunch of Manhattan attorneys will be looking at this. Because doesn't the league have to approve this as the final step?
3/4 of the owners have to approve it as a final step.
Well, just today, the commissioner of the NFL, Goodell, stood up before Tom Benson, saying that Tom Benson is indeed in charge of these teams. He's making decisions.
And he does control 100% of the voting rights, which means that he can make personnel, management decisions, and the other heirs, although they might hold a majority stake, don't have any voting power.
And he's had another granddaughter, who I imagine is an heir in a different way, come forward and speak on his behalf.
That's right. Tom Benson's late son, Robert, had a daughter, Dawn, who has pretty much, she's never been involved with the team. She lives near Ostrom with her husband and 4 children. And she came out yesterday saying that she was heartbroken by the developments here, but supports her grandfather.
Yeah, I'm sure it is a heartbreaking family situation. You mentioned that the family that is seeking to have Mr. Benson declared incompetent to run the teams had placed a certain value over what the promissory note was. Where did they get this value from? How did they value
That's
the team?
never been revealed. They didn't include any of their valuation in the lawsuit that they filed, but did say that it was believed that he had undervalued the property. I mean, the assets that he's offering also include this ranch and automobile dealerships and that sort of thing.
So this will continue to really be an issue in the courts for a while.
It'll be in the courts in Louisiana, in the court in Texas, and also this issue will play out somewhat behind the scenes in private.
Okay, and will also be a topic of conversation among New Orleanians, also a major topic of conversation for a while. Thanks a lot, Jaquetta.
Thank you.
Okay, talking about conversations, we want to hear the conversations that went on up in Washington, D.C. at the Mardi Gras Ball. You were there, so give us a scoop.
I was, and a lot of people were talking about how much has changed. And to understand that, you need to understand what it is, and it's a 3-day nonstop party. You get these warnings going in that it's a marathon, not a sprint, but I did fine. I felt like I've been preparing for it my whole life.
True Louisiana man.
Right. And you know, the bar at the Hilton becomes the 65th parish, and I know from hanging out at the bar there were many informed sources, viewers that I spoke with. And I won't be giving up any secrets from the bar, but folks did talk about how it's changed, and the days of Russell Long singing with a jazz band at 3 a.m. and you know, shutting down bars around town with lawmakers are over. You know, and last year we saw Mary Landrieu, her hospitality suite, being serenaded by Buddy Caldwell, and it was caught on his cell phone, and it became a campaign commercial. So things are kind of moving behind closed doors a little bit. But as for the political chatter, you know, I think our headline for La Politics Weekly, which we distributed at the hotel, said it best, which was Mardi Gras Mambo. You know, whether it was talking about the $1.6 billion budget hole, the super PACs that are going to dominate this election cycle, or the oil prices, that cash was king at Mardi Gras this year. You know, it seems like almost every candidate in the governor's race now has a super PAC. We found out just late last week that Jay Darden has one. There are rumors that you know, that we may see a couple of others. And it's kind of like, you know, super PACs are the new black. It's the popular thing to have on the campaign cycle. But there's also, on the governor's race, the talk is that the field is not settled. And I did learn today, I talked to Russell Honore, a retired Army Lieutenant General, and he said he's thinking about the race. A couple of our subscribers called me and told me there was an automated poll Thursday evening that tested his favorability by name. So, you know, we could see him get in the race, and he would run as an independent, he told me. He said he's open to other parties, but no party has approached him. And
what about Mayor Mitch Landrieu? Is there still talk of his getting into it?
You know,
has there been any polling with him in it?
Oh, absolutely, and he does well in that polling. And you know, some folks say that he's looking at it very seriously. Others say it's completely impossible, especially when you look at last year. And then there's the rest of us who just have no clue whatsoever. But he is going to report between $30,000 and $40,000 in the bank for this upcoming cycle, for this reporting period, which, you know, that's not a number that a candidate wants to have. But if you take a step back and look at his 2014, you know, that Mayor Landrieu had a pretty tough year. He had re-election. He dumped the money into that. You know, he was at the Capitol a lot. I saw him almost every week working on policy for the city of New Orleans. He went to war with his sister in that Senate election, and he had some very contentious, controversial issues back home. So, you know, he really had no time to fundraise. But he's the kind of guy that if he wants to get in this race, he can certainly raise a lot of money. But suggestions from his supporters are that he may want to get more involved in the presidential race. But he's looking at it. If you can show him a poll that shows him a path to victory, he'd certainly take another look at it. But it seems like for now he's focused on the city. He's keeping his options open. We'll just have to wait and see.
I know it's tradition with that ball to rotate the chairman among the members of Congress, and this year was Congressman Bustani from the Lafayette area.
Right.
And from your accounts, he was really able to pack the place. That the whole hotel sold out, and able to really draw a lot of money into it. Are we seeing the power of these Republican doctors now and what they can do and how they can pack a ballroom in Washington? Or?
Well, you're right. We now have an extra doctor on the Hill. Even before that, we had more doctors serving on the Hill per capita than any other state. And they are wielding influence. Ralph Abraham, the new doctor, the congressman from North Louisiana, just received the chairmanship of a subcommittee, which is really unheard of for a freshman. These are doled out by seniority. But, he kind of had luck on his side. All the 4 Republicans on the subcommittee, 3 were freshmen. The ranking member already had a subcommittee somewhere else. And interestingly enough, the vote for speaker, alphabetical order, he came first. So that's kind of, it's one of those power trips, right? It helped set the tone for the speaker's election. But yeah, Lafayette had a big contingency there. It usually happens whoever's the chairman has the biggest group, and that they rented out an entire Airbus for the Lafayette contingency, and the royalty had jet planes, which I'm sure sounded great when oil prices were at $100.
And the king was from Lafayette, so the
Right.
chairman always gets to appoint the king.
Exactly.
So it was a good time had by all, would you say, up
Absolutely.
there in D.C.?
Yes, it was great.
Okay, thanks a lot, Jeremy. I hope you had a good time, too. Thanks for making it here. I know you had a long drive coming in, so it's great to have you here. Not from D.C.,
No.
from
Lafayette?
Lafayette, long enough. Okay, over to Dawn now. Talk of a new parish. What is this talk of a new parish?
Some of this talk actually started in Washington, where the Hilton gets renamed the 65th Parish. That's the bar for the duration of Washington Mardi Gras. State Representative Jeff Arnold used that to his advantage to say, I'm going to pitch legislation at the next session to create the 65th Parish, which he says might be called Barataria Parish if he has his way. But it would encompass Algiers and the West Bank portions of Jefferson Parish and create one whole contiguous parish on the West Bank. A lot of politicos I've spoken to say, this isn't his real idea. This isn't what he really wants to have happen. It's just a way to get people talking for a part of both Jefferson and Orleans that maybe feels like the stepchild often, partly because of the boundary of the river. They just feel like or maybe possibly don't get the services they otherwise would. Jeff Arnold tried in 2003 actually to get Algiers to become its own city. Both New Orleans City Council and the mayor at the time vehemently fought against that plan. It failed. They say, Mayor Landrieu told me last week that it would be unwise to pass any legislation like this. Jefferson Parish President Young said, I'm not going to comment on it until I see the legislation, but I don't necessarily think it's a great idea. Arnold says there is the population and the money on the West Bank to support their own parish. Now, the logistics of this are a nightmare. To have to create an entire new parish government, police force, fire department, school system, I mean, the list goes, library system, the list goes on and on and on and on and on. But it wouldn't be any different tax revenue. It would be the tax revenue that exists on the West Bank, and the tax revenue that exists on the East Bank would stay on the East Bank. So maybe services would improve on both sides of the river, but nobody's crunched the numbers yet to see if there even is the population to support it.
And the population totals up over 200,000, right? For both parishes combined.
And there is a lot of money on the West Bank. There's Federal City coming in. There's all the oil field work. There's some movie industry work. So there's money, and they feel like they're not as served as the East Bank sometimes and are forgotten just being on that side of the river. So I think what Jeff Arnold intended is exactly what is happening. People are starting to talk about it, and maybe there are some things that can change. I don't think, and maybe Jeremy can comment, I don't think we're actually going to see a new 65th parish.
Yeah, well, you're not, okay, because there's too much political struggle right there. The city council in New Orleans will never approve weakening the size of the city of New Orleans and losing the population base. But also, think of all those parishes as you go up the river that are split by the Mississippi. Does that open the way for each one of them to say,
we want our own?
Yeah, from the side that's on the smaller side, saying, well, we don't get enough attention from the other side. And so this is something that you don't want to go into.
But is this really going to come up, do you think, in the session? Will he?
Sure, if he files the bill, I'm sure he can get a hearing. I mean,
it might not get out of committee, but
he's the dean of the House, and he's a popular lawmaker inside the rails, and he'll get a hearing. But in a year where we've got the budget and Common Core and everything else, it's hard to imagine it's going to move anywhere.
Got to say, though, the Barataria Parish does sound right.
That's a pretty great sound.
It gets people talking,
yeah,
right?
It does indeed.
I think that was the
Thanks
point.
a lot, Don. All right, over to Jeremy and talking more about legislature and term limits. You wrote a piece about how in 2020 we're going to have a big turnover because of term limits at the legislature.
And we're going to have a big turnover this year going into the next term. There are 21 lawmakers altogether on the do not run list, as I call it. These are folks who are term limited. They can't run again. But we're going to see another round of that in 4 years in 2019, and we'll see 66 overall. So by 2020, we're going to see slightly more than half the legislature turnover. And that's kind of a moving target, because you're going to see some House members running for the Senate, which is already happening. And we'll probably see a few instances of senators willing to take a bump down and try to get in the lower chamber just to be able to stay in the legislature.
So what does this do then to governing when you have such a turnover, even if it's not more than half, like you said, because some of them may stay just in different chambers? What does that do to, as you put it, institutional knowledge of how it works? Right,
and I'll give you a good example right now. Lawmakers are battling the governor. They need to figure out a way to raise money. The governor has refused to sign any tax proposal, but a few, old timers figured out, well, hey, there's a resolution we can pass that's veto-proof, 2/3 vote for, a 1-year suspension of credits, or if you're a new guy coming in, unless you're going to sit there and read all the rules and
aren't you depending on the knowledge of the staffers? They then hold the institutional knowledge.
Yeah, and you'll still have the staff, and the staff's going to have a large job. Last time this happened, it was a much larger group that turned over. And they ended up having, a 4-day orientation process followed by smaller training of 14 different groups. So it's a big strain on the legislative staff. But, a lot of little things change that you wouldn't think of, like the dynamics on the floor. You're used to seeing groups and alliances that lawmakers can count on to go get votes, and all of that changes and has to be built up over time.
Okay, let's talk about budget too, and what we're facing, and some ideas that maybe will be bubbling up and that we're hearing about right now, because we are facing a really big deficit. How are we going to handle this?
Yeah, and it's not just this year. If you look at the 5-year revenue projection, we're looking at the next 3-4 years. Budget deficits between $1.2 and $1.6 billion. So if nothing changes, we're going to be in this mess for a while. But lawmakers, re-election looms over everything, and so that lawmakers just want to make sure that they cast the right kind of votes to get them back into office in the fall. They're also they're not just fighting Bobby Jindal. They're fighting groups like the Louisiana Association of Business and Industry, one of the most influential groups at the Capitol. Most lawmakers I'm talking to want to know what they're going to do, not what Bobby Jindal's going to do. But we've heard different ideas. We've heard about an exemption for certain sales taxes, a temporary suspension of sales tax exemptions. We've heard about changes to the inventory tax credit, which would really affect local money. The local government would probably come to the table and complain about that. There's some Walt Leger, the state representative here, Speaker Pro Tem from New Orleans, is having some very informal conversations about a cigarette tax. He said he's not 100% sure he's willing to bring that, but that he sees that as a viable way to raise some revenue.
Any chance of getting something like that past the governor's desk?
It would have to be revenue neutral. The governor said he will not sign any net tax increase or any suspension or elimination of tax credits or exemptions unless it's revenue neutral, which would basically mean not raising revenue. But he said he's going to bring some ideas to the table by the end of next month. We don't know what those ideas are yet, but the governor said he's going to bring some possible solutions.
Well, there's been talk also among some legislators, right, of getting a package passed rather quickly in the session so that they could override a veto?
Right, and this is where legislative independence comes in, and this is kind of like seeing Bigfoot. I mean, if we see lawmakers act on their own, it would really be something rare. But they're talking about getting a package of bills together, passing them very quickly in the session so they would have enough time to override the governor's veto in the same session so they wouldn't have to come back in a special session. But, in the past century, I want to say I think that's only happened, 1 or 2 times.
Okay, we'll be keeping a close eye because we've got some serious issues before us as a state with our budget, that's for sure. Thanks a lot, Jeremy. Jaquetta, there is a proposal out there right now by the owner of Tipitina's, Roland von Kernatowski, I think I said his name right, and his business partner, Dr. George, I believe. They're saying we have an idea of how to put the land that right now is just not being used at all next to the airport that used to be occupied by Bally's Casino. They say we have a plan for that.
That's right. They presented a proposal to the Non-Flood Protection Asset Management Authority. That's a mouthful.
Yes, it is.
But this is a state political subdivision created in 2010 to manage all the assets of the Orleans Parish Levy Board.
It's the old levy board without the levy.
Right.
It's pretty much what
exactly,
it is, yeah.
that aren't flood protection related. And so we're talking about 4.5 acres of land and a 30,000 square foot building. And as you mentioned, this was where Bally's Riverboat Casino was docked. The building is where there was a restaurant inside and administrative offices and restrooms. Bally's, of course, did not reopen after Hurricane Katrina. It became the Amelia Bell and moved on to St. Mary Parish. And what they proposed is an amphitheater that would have live music, as well as a marina dock area for boaters there, and a water park, a water area that would have zip lines and a lazy river and some other interesting features.
And some shopping too, and
That's right.
an open air market.
An open air market and some shops and restaurants as well.
So they have drawings, they have renderings, they have this idea. It's now before this management board.
That's right.
What are I mean, this is truly right now, just at the very beginning of talks, ideas, right?
Everyone I've talked to cautioned that this is in the very, very early stages. They've presented a lease proposal to the management board, 50 years with an option to renew for another 50 years. But they haven't presented just yet a finance plan, and of course the management board could come back with some other idea for what they would pay, they would want in rent.
Well, this man, Roland von Kernatowski, he's not to be taken lightly. You don't hear much about him, but he's one of the really important players in his community. He bought Tipitina's. He's established his Tipitina's Foundation, which throughout the state now has facilities where they're training people to be musicians. They're doing a lot of important work for music, maybe the most important work for music. And then he did the impossible, and he resolved the whole situation with the Orpheum. All the different efforts that people wanted to buy the Orpheum, and it failed. He came and he bought it, and he's going to bring it back. And so you actually have the man who runs Tipitina's running the Orpheum. But he's dedicated to New Orleans. He has money. And if he seems like the kind of guy who can deliver on this sort of thing.
And that's what makes this board very optimistic about the proposal. The chairman of the board said this is a serious bid, this is a serious plan. It was the only plan they received, but they're very excited about it.
Well, the only other option right now is nothing, because there's really nothing going on in that area. And a lot of people would feel almost kind of foolish to want to get involved in that area. So.
Sure.
Right, and as Errol pointed out, Mr. von Kernatowski is the owner of Tipitina's, so he has very strong musical connections. So with an amphitheater and staging concerts, he knows how to do that.
Exactly, and that's part of a big part of his proposal, that he would leverage those ties that he's already built in that community and bring them out to a different area.
Okay, thanks a lot, Jaquetta. We'll be looking for that one. And Errol, you know, we're talking about an area that's eastern New Orleans that's not being used right now, and hopefully will be put into good commerce. But I know you wanted to talk a bit about eastern New Orleans and how it's
well, this is right on the edge of East New Orleans, and I wish it the best. But man, that part of town has been a hard sell. I mean, even UNL, where the New Orleans East campus is, when they've had events over there, the problem is that area, for most people where you live, that area is far away. You know, it's a good drive. And so it's kind of hard to attract people into that area. If you go on the other side of the high rise into Eastern New Orleans, like where Jazzland was, most people live on this side of the high rise, and the high rise is a big psychological barrier. If you're on the St. Tammany side, you got the 6 Mile Bridge. So you got 6 Mile Bridge on this side and the high rise on the other. And it's a long ride, and it's just been hard to draw people into that area. It's been hard to attract people. And I think anything, now maybe this particular project will work because it's a little bit closer in. It's where the old Valley thing was. But the further you go into the east, the more difficult it gets. I think the kind of things that sell tickets that you need to rely on are difficult. Jaquetta, we were talking about the Jazzland site. That's being used now for movie scenes, right?
Leased out for movies.
But it's more of like on a week-by-week basis. It's not like a regular working studio. And if something like Michoud facilities, if the space facilities would have become a regular thing and was still there. I mean, that's probably the sort of thing it needs. It never really developed as a transportation artery that people had once envisioned. You know, they thought you could have office parks there and people go back and forth. And that activity really switched out to Harahan by Edwards Avenue into that direction. And so some of the anticipation for the area just never really developed, and it's just a huge piece of land that needs a big idea that'll work.
And of course, it was such a serious blow by Hurricane Katrina, and it's really been hard for New Orleans East to
that's part
rebound
of the
back.
too. Yeah, I mean, it does a lot of convincing to get somebody to want to invest in there just because it is so vulnerable. And
as far as businesses, you know, coming back post Katrina to New Orleans East, we have seen some of the bigger businesses finally move back in, like major grocery stores. And
that's right, especially those that serve people, so services that people need. There's a Walmart there and in Gentilly that reopened, and other businesses like that are things. But the things I think New Orleans East residents would want are more restaurants and other soft services, not the hard things like grocery stores.
It just hasn't had enough of those kind of amenities. You know, I remember a candidate for running for council out there one time, and his big campaign thing is that he'd bring a Taco Bell there, okay? I mean, you need more.
Yeah, and in post-Katrina, it has been really difficult for the area to struggle back. So this would be a plus, certainly, to get this kind of proposal and use of that land again back into commerce.
So.
All righty, it is now time to look ahead. Errol.
Well, Biloxi is going to be getting a minor league baseball team, a AA minor league baseball team affiliated with the Milwaukee Brewers. They had a big community thing to vote for a name, and the name that won was the Shuckers. So it's going to be the Biloxi Shuckers. They built a new stadium by Beau Rivage, and they'll take the field in April.
All right, good luck to them. Jeremy.
The Police Jury Association of Louisiana is in town for their annual convention. First time in recent memory that all 64 parishes will have a representative, and that's really because almost all of the candidates for governor and lieutenant governor come from local government, parish presidents, mayors, city council, so they're feeling pretty good about that. No word on the 65th parish though.
Okay, thanks. Don.
Back to that area along the lake, the New Orleans Lakefront Airport is having a Save Our Murals restoration fundraiser. It's February 9th from 6 to 8. You can find out more at friendsofneworleanslakefrontairport.org.
Great. Jaquetta.
While the Benson saga has been playing out so far, mostly in filings in court and in the newspaper, next week, Wednesday, will be the first time that a court hears some of this. It'll be in Texas, and there's a temporary restraining order now against Mr. Benson in touching any trusts related to his late first wife, Shirley, and so a judge will consider whether to extend that order.
Okay, thanks a lot, Jaquetta. Thank you guys for being here, and thank you all so much for joining us. Of course, we want to see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.